How deep can a chip moat really be if a newcomer crossed it in just 16 months? OpenAI's Jalapeño beat every Nvidia, AMD, and Google chip that SemiAnalysis's tested, measured by AI output per megawatt. Now, there are still caveats, and we'll cover those, but the speed is hard to miss. So what does this mean? An advantage used to be something that you could keep. Infrastructure, experience, a standard everyone else had to build against, those compounded, and the lead widened on its own. That has stopped. The advantage is still something, though, that every company in this race is working to hold. But as we keep seeing, it can't be held for long. And an advantage that has to be won again and again every few months is one that more institutions can try to participate in. That is what an era of rapid development looks like. The lead keeps changing hands. No one can wall it in. We'll talk about how that's a good thing. That's today's lead. Also today, Bill Gates wants to fence off jobs for humans, gas plants race new siting rules, a spaceport lands on contested marsh, and an antibody reaches an Ebola outbreak. Come with me, let's get into it. Anyone buying Nvidia hardware to run AI now has to reckon with the first-time chipmaker that built its challenger in about 16 months. OpenAI calls it Jalapeño. It's an inference chip, and it runs finished AI models and gives users their answers. OpenAI built it together with Broadcom. So, did OpenAI really beat Nvidia? Well, first, the caveat. The headline efficiency numbers did come from OpenAI themselves, the company that, of course, benefits most if people believe them. SemiAnalysis's also watched the benchmark runs in person, but they didn't run the full test suite themselves. Now, OpenAI also tuned Jalapeño around its own model plans. It wins on the open models tested, but not on every possible workload. On a separate test, SemiAnalysis's wrote, Nvidia absolutely destroys all competitors on Minimax M3432B. So Nvidia may still lead in the general case, but even within those limits, Jalapeño crossed a really important line. It won on a measure that now helps shape how data centers are priced. Raw speed matters less once electricity becomes scarce. What matters is how much AI output each megawatt produces. And on that measure, Jalapeño beat every Nvidia, AMD, and Google chip in SemiAnalysis's comparison. OpenAI says that it started designing Jalapeño in mid-2024 and had working silicon by November 2025. Chip companies usually take years to do that. SemiAnalysis's put the new economics like this. If you have 1 gigawatt of power, then throughput per watt is revenue. Nvidia's bigger vulnerability turned out to be its software advantage. CUDA is the huge set of tools that developers have built around Nvidia chips. For years, that ecosystem looked harder to challenge than the chips did themselves. SemiAnalysis's now says, the CUDA moat is potentially dead, given how fast OpenAI can bring up new models on their silicon. Now, that doesn't remove every barrier. A handful of suppliers still control memory and foundry capacity. Jalapeño needs both. But the benchmark used to test the wider field, called AgentX, is now open source. Any buyer or lab with the right hardware and software can run it and check a chipmaker's claims. That changes who gets to judge the next performance claim. So your access to AI now depends more on electricity and memory than any one company's permanent hold on the chip layer. OpenAI also brought its own model roadmap, a Broadcom partnership, and access to scarce manufacturing. They are well-resourced. This wasn't some overnight garage project. But still, CUDA's edge came from years of accumulated work. That was never a fixed law of computing. OpenAI says its first custom inference chip reached working silicon in just 16 months, and SemiAnalysis's comparison ranked it first on the metric that drives the power bill. That open benchmark matters just as much. Now other labs can verify a chip's performance themselves instead of only trusting the company that sells it. More labs and buyers can now check the result, challenge it, and build on what they learn. The moat used to exist, for sure. It's what entrenched advantage into companies for so long. But now we can see that advantage came mostly from time. And time is getting cheaper. All right, as that hardware advantage fades, workers aged 22 to 25 in AI-exposed occupations are already facing a tighter hiring market. So what should society protect once AI can reach every job? Bill Gates changed his answer. In 2023, he called the transition manageable, but in an interview with Semaphore and in a Gates Notes post published on Tuesday, he said he now expects far fewer jobs. He said, there isn't a job that isn't affected. And other researchers back up how far that warning reaches. The IMF estimates AI could affect about 40% of jobs in emerging economies and 60% in advanced ones. Stanford researchers already found a hiring gap among young workers in the most AI-exposed jobs. But the national picture remains less clear. The Yale Budget Lab has not found a clear AI mark in overall employment. Some jobs and age groups are already losing work to AI, even though the overall numbers don't show it yet. Gates said he feels deafened by the silence from institutions that should be preparing. He called this moment utterly a unique moment in evolutionary history. He's absolutely right about that. Now, he responded to this in two different ways. First, tax companies on the AI and computing power they use. That was one suggestion. A tax on AI use would take a share of the money going to compute owners and use it to fund a broader safety net. Second, set aside certain kinds of work for people only through what he calls human-only jobs. Gates also rejected the idea that private charity should cover this transition. He said, government is 20 times bigger than all philanthropy, so no, philanthropy cannot solve the safety net issue. So for you, the real question is whether losing paid work also means losing not just income, but healthcare, dignity, and a stable place in society. Right now, people lose income and hope for future help at the same time. Someone who loses their job this year can't pay rent with a promise of some future abundance. Setting aside human-only jobs keeps income and hope tied together, and that is exactly wrong. They protect a few chosen tasks, but let institutions avoid building a stronger safety net for everyone. It keeps the status quo exactly as it is and does nothing to actually help the problem. Now, the token tax faces an even deeper problem. It pulls money from where AI profits pile up and spreads that gain more broadly. How it's designed would really be important, and nobody appears to have tested a plan at the scale that Gates now imagines. AI could free people from work they never chose and let each person do or contribute more. That only becomes real freedom once people no longer need a job just to survive, doing tasks that machines can increasingly already do. All right, that same fight over a shared safety net reaches people who live beside a proposed power plant, where data centers are being built faster than local governments can control them. Why is so much gas power showing up around these data centers? Global Energy Monitor counts 189 gigawatts of gas generation planned or proposed for U.S. data centers. That is nearly double what it counted earlier this year. Much of that would sit right on the data center site. Operators plan to build and burn their own gas instead of drawing all their power from the shared grid. In Britain, Foxglove estimates that 2 planned campuses could release about 4.5 million tons of carbon dioxide each year. Foxglove says that would exceed ExxonMobil's entire reported UK transmissions footprint from 2023. Now, the government called that comparison misleading, saying that it assumes full use from day one. Foxglove said the plants are designed to run at continuous full load. Now, that wait in the queue explains the rush. Britain has 73 gigawatts of proposed data center demand still waiting for grid connections. U.S. operators face multi-year delays too. When a company builds its own gas plant on site, then it saves some of that wait, but it also turns it into pollution that the people nearby have to breathe. Now, governments are starting to respond. Australia's National Cabinet meets today to discuss proposed national rules for data centers. The proposed rules are not expected to apply retroactively, though, and reports say developers are filing permits now, hoping to get grandfathered in quickly. U.S. planners told Politico they were having an oh shit moment because projects they approved with little scrutiny are now coming back as organized opposition. And in Emporia, Virginia, prosecutors have dropped charges against the resident that was arrested for clapping at a data center meeting. In-person meetings are returning, and a county moratorium vote is due in November. So for communities, what matters is a local number. It's the plant next to their homes, the cost on their electric bills, and the pollution where they live. And here you can point to exactly what's causing the complaints. Operators are building their own gas generation to skip the shared queue. The company avoids the delay, but the people living nearby end up carrying it instead. And the good news is that no town has to figure out its response alone anymore. Pennsylvania has state standards now tied to streamlined approvals. California requires some operators to cover more of their own costs. Australia is developing national rules for where these plants can be sited. Those standards need to spread everywhere, because blocking a project in one powerful community can just push it toward another community with less power to object. Rules that apply everywhere can make this build-out cleaner and fairer no matter where it happens. All right, those portable rules arrive just as people in Vermilion Parish face one of the largest infrastructure proposals anywhere in the country. SpaceX, as announced, plans to spend up to $100 billion on Starbase Louisiana, a launch complex covering roughly 125,000 acres of coastal marsh. SpaceX says the site is designed to eventually handle thousands of Starship flights every year. Can Louisiana gain the spaceport without forcing the marsh and its neighbors to absorb the damage? Now, the upside does seem real, even though the state agency that is promoting the deal supplied those numbers. Louisiana Economic Development projects more than 3,000 direct jobs, plus another 8,100 indirect jobs. The agency puts the wages at nearly 3 times the regional average. And that is important in a parish where the coastline and the economy have been eroding together for decades. Construction is scheduled to start at the end of 2027. SpaceX is aiming for a first launch in 2029 with full operation by around 2030. The chosen site sits beside 2 state wildlife refuges on the Pecan Island. It's a sinking coastal marsh and prime habitat for migrating waterfowl. State tax breaks helped seal the deal, and so did launch liability shields, which limit what neighbors can recover if operations damage their property. A proposed federal rule could also waive some environmental reviews that affect the site. At Boca Chica, Texas, SpaceX has a history that includes a $148,000 wastewater fine. That is a small cost next to a project this size, but it does show that launch sites leave a real mark on the places that host them. SpaceX has proposed doing coastal restoration work. The Louisiana Wildlife Federation is pushing for a strict permit rather than just opposing the spaceport outright. If the permit includes independent review and enforceable restoration, then Louisiana could keep both gains. If reviews are waived and liability shields stay in place, then the marsh will carry the risk instead. Now, for Louisiana, this is a chance to bring thousands of well-paid jobs into a parish that has lost land and opportunity for years. The rocket program and the deal's terms are 2 separate choices here. Thousands of launches could open up access to space, which is fantastic, but liability shields decide whether nearby residents can get compensated when that expansion harms them. When, not if. The state's job numbers deserve the same scrutiny as SpaceX's restoration promise as well. Both come from parties who benefit when the project looks generous. A strong permit doesn't have to stop the launches. It can simply require SpaceX to restore what it disturbs, measure what it releases, and stay answerable to the people who live beside the site. That is how Louisiana can get a spaceport without treating its coast and its people as expendable. All right, in Ituri, where the Democratic Republic of Congo is fighting its deadliest Ebola outbreak, protective measures had to move much faster than they have been. By August 23rd, health authorities counted 5,514 cases and 2,642 deaths. More than 300 people died in 1 week, and roughly 250,000 people were displaced in an active conflict zone. Could an experimental medicine help fight a strain with so far no approved vaccine or treatment? Now, the strain involved is Bundibugyo. Researchers designed MBP-134 to work against every known species in the Ebola family. It combines 2 lab-built antibodies, so picture them as 2 hands gripping parts of the virus that stay the same across its different forms. That gives one medicine a shot at blocking several versions instead of just chasing each strain on its own. A 39-year-old healthcare worker who was infected in Ituri was evacuated to Germany. Doctors gave the cocktail under an FDA emergency authorization along with remdesivir and supportive care. Because of that combination, it's actually hard to tell which treatment caused the result that came. The patient's own immune system was also starting to make antibodies of its own. Still, the amount of viral genetic material kept falling until doctors could no longer detect it in blood, throat, urine, or stool by day 13. The patient left the hospital on day 22. Now, a second paper in Nature Medicine describes 5 exposed family members who got the cocktail 5 or 6 days after contact. The group included 1 vaccinated adult and 4 unvaccinated children, ages 1 to 7. All 5 stayed disease-free through 21 days of monitoring. Researchers reported no side effects tied to the treatment. Now, the limits here are important to say. This was just 1 treated patient and 1 small family cluster. Neither case was a controlled trial, and other care may have shaped the outcome. The authors do say we need larger studies before calling the cocktail actually effective. Now, for these people facing this outbreak, the breakthrough is this. Designing a defense and getting it into somebody's body now seems to be taking far less time. Now, effectiveness does remain unproven, but these cases show that researchers could manufacture a broad antibody treatment, secure emergency authorization, and deliver it during the very outbreak it was built to answer. Oxford researchers got their Bundibugyo vaccine into a 50-person early trial in roughly 8 weeks, and now doctors have given a designed antibody to an infected worker and to exposed children during that same emergency. In the past, there was simply no strain-specific treatment ready to use at all. This new one is a defense built while the outbreak is still happening, and that is a big deal. All right, let's bring it to a close today. Let's connect this back to the moat we talked about in our lead story. Nvidia's defense was built from years of software, specialized hardware, and developer habit. OpenAI closed part of that gap in just 16 months because none of those advantages were actual laws of nature. The constraint moved. Power now matters more, and that change actually reaches far beyond a server rack too. It reaches workers who are asking who actually gets the value created by all that computing power. Gates's token tax aimed at the right target, the gains piling up around ownership, but it and his human-only jobs proposal missed the bigger task, making sure people can live securely without having to keep working for pay and dignity. It reaches communities that live beside gas plants. Building all this needs power, and residents are starting to win rules that make operators pay more of the cost. It reaches Louisiana's coasts, where a huge gain for spaceflight comes with legal shields that could leave the least powerful neighbors holding the damage. And in the Congo, that same speeding up looks completely different. A biological defense went from the drawing board to an active outbreak while people still needed it. That is the bigger pattern we are seeing today. Advantages are shortening. Delivery keeps getting faster. The old barriers keep coming down. What matters now is whether the benefits spread as fast as the technology into public benchmarks, a broad economic floor, community power, enforceable protection, and medicine that reaches people during the emergency itself. The old moats came from time, scarcity, and restricted access. All 3 of those barriers are starting to fall. We'll see you tomorrow.